Hi, I'm Justin with akgrinders.com. I'm here to talk about the Jiffy sander conversion on this 4x36 sander. The 4x36 is the sander that you're probably used to seeing. It uses these belts that all the big box stores carry. Typically 1 or 2 grits. Typically they're quite expensive for the low quality that they are. And it kind of makes it to where you don't use this as the tool that it could be, just because it ends up being handicapped by the cost and the low availability of these sanding belts. That's where this Jiffy sander conversion comes in. I want you to be able to use 1x42 belts in a variety of grits. These are typically used on knife and tool sharpeners. I want you to be able to use 2x48 belts, also in a variety of grits, a variety of backings as far as flexibility is concerned. You can get these in Cubitron, all kinds of synthetic, you can get them in ceramics. Lots of options, all because you're no longer tied to the 4x36 belts that you normally would be with these sanders. I'm going to grab the camera and I'm going to show you a couple of more features that you're going to appreciate about using the Jiffy conversion as opposed to the 4x36 sander that you originally started with. Okay, I have you looking over my shoulder pretty much, sitting on top of this Jiffy conversion. Now, one of the big appeals of running this conversion is that it allows you a lot more access to the belt in a couple different ways. The first one is that no longer are you restricted to a hard metal surface, either here on the top of the wheel or here on this flat back. Now you're able to run these wheels are a 7 to 8 durometer. It's a really stiff rubber, a lot like you'd say maybe the heel of a dress shoe. And this allows you to work on either wheel. This larger wheel gives you a little bit bigger surface to work on, which is nice. Another thing that we can do that we really didn't have access to before is this lets you run a slack belt. How slack is going to be up to you to an extent. You're going to determine it by adjusting your tracking knobs. But what this will do is it lets the sanding belt, you can see it, it'll flex with whatever you're using. So on a round item, if we were sitting here up here, for one thing, you're going to see one of the other problems with the 4x36 is that access to the belt is quite limited, just because you have this whole plate in the way. So the edges of the belt, I guess you can't see it here. On this one I've actually notched slightly. I guess I'm just out of range. But just to be able to get to the edge of the belt with some objects. With this, you can see the edge of the belt is wide open. That'll let you get into areas that you never could before with the 4x36. In fact, even some areas that you wouldn't have been able to get into with, say, a sanding drum or an oscillating sanding drum. A lot of possibilities that this opens up. With the slack belt, you're not going to leave grooves or flat spots, I shouldn't say grooves, flat spots on your work because it's going to flex around an object. You can also change that with the type of backings that you buy. The stiffer backings obviously are going to flex less, but even because of the unsupported portion, you can see that there's a lot more ability to give here. Also, as you get into the finer grits on the hard surface, you get the bump, bump, bump as the seam comes around. With this type of a setup, it's nice and smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on for a minute, and I'll show you that we're able to run the tracking with the old tracking unit, whatever your sander is set up with, but we're able to use this whole thing a lot more. This also has a tilting feature right here, and so it's got 22 degrees of tilt either direction. So if you wanted to make one of these wheels stand out more, maybe an example would be like doing woodworking and having big wide curves, you know, scallops cut out. might be real nice to swivel this forward and have this almost 4-inch wheel to work off of. And once again, these are rubber wheels, so you're not going to have the bounce that you get working off of the metal. I'll show you here in a second with some wood and then also some metal. Now typically your sander isn't going to do metal quite the same way. Mine's geared up just a bit, specifically because I've been doing a lot of aluminum, more aluminum. But you'll understand what I'm talking about here in just a minute. So we'll take a look and see. So I'm not using a real heavy belt here, but just to illustrate, you can see that I'm able to clean some of this up. And obviously, you'd normally not be using, you wouldn't have such rough looking turned wood spindle, but the point is just to emphasize how much more ability this has than the sander that you're used to using with the 4x36. Now if you wanted, you could also run this over the wheel a little bit. And you could bend a little bit on the edge of the wheel. If you can't tell what I'm doing, I'm trying to roll this so I get a little bit of a shape. This is a heavier backing. I believe this is an X-weight backing, but the lighter the backing, the easier it's going to roll over this wheel, and the tighter the radius you'll get on this edge. Now once again, yours isn't going to handle metal quite the same as mine. I have a dull belt on here right now, but this is what happens when you use metal typically, just because you get the seam running by. Normally it would bounce a little bit slower, but you can see this is what happens when you've got the slack portion to work with. So you can see how much smoother it is. Also, if you're using a flat platen, you wouldn't be able to get the nice curves without it leaving lines. See if this will pick it up. Okay, so now to emphasize the difference too in the materials, there's a reason that these have the 78 durometer wheels. Here's this one. Here's this one. I'm trying to make it so you can see exactly what it's doing. You can see the seam doesn't affect it the same way. There's a little bit of bounce, but as soon as I do anything to it, it goes away. Especially Another thing that you'll notice is that this 4x36 belt, when you ran it originally, when you start leaning into it, you're creating a braking surface by pinching the belt between this backing and your work. When you're working on these wheels, the wheel is rolling with the belt, so you're not pinching it the same way. To a large extent, you're freeing up some horsepower to actually do some work with the belt. So that's it for the Jiffy sander conversion. Have a good afternoon.